when you first started to get involved in these political movements and the party and so on and so forth?
Well, I wasn't involved politically in Ithaca until, of any significant degree, until I got into Cornell, which was in 1946. And that was around the time when the Cold War began. This was obviously after the Second World War, when we were allies of the Soviet Union. And prior to that period, the Soviet Union was considered a very important ally of the United States, and there was a very, at least outwardly, a great deal of friendship and a feeling of sympathy and friendship, as I mentioned, towards the Soviet Union. I remember at one time during the war, my mother was the depository of aid for the Soviet Union, clothes and so forth, that people brought their store and deposited there, and then they were subsequently shipped over to Russia. I don't know how that was done, but in any case, and people generally in the community, and I suppose not only in the community such as Ithaca, but in other communities, felt an alliance with the Soviet Union and a sympathy for the terrible ordeal that the people of the Soviet Union were going through because of the war, and in the days before we became involved. So, we must remember that the Soviet Union lost 20 million people during the Second World War. So, there was a recognition of that, and a recognition of the role that the Soviets played in the defeat of Hitler. So that was the general atmosphere. But by the time I got to Cornell, which was in 1946, as I mentioned, things had begun to change. So that when Henry Wallace, for instance, ran for the presidency in 1948, he was the Soviets endorsed him, and of course that was something that was used against him, and it certainly didn't lead to his defeat, but this was like the kiss of death, that he was approved by that he was endorsed by the Soviets, and whether they should have done that or not, of course, that's another question. And also the fact that that the Progressive Party, which promoted, under which Wallace ran, some people consider that to be communist dominated, and of course that was a negative factor as well. So there was, the anti-Soviet, the anti-communist, the anti-progressive, the anti-left sentiment throughout the country was increasing in a rapid manner, and then there was that speech by Churchill where he established the concept of the Iron Curtain. And so there was a purge of the left trade union leadership. Because when I went into Cornell and I was in School of Industrial Labor Relations, one of my thoughts for the future was that I would get into the trade union movement. Because before I got to Cornell, a number of the CIO unions were left-led, and and I had made some connections, minor connections, before I'd gone to Cornell. I figured when I got out of Cornell with a degree in industrial labor relation that I could, make a possible career out of this. But by the time I got out of school, the situation was entirely different, and there were very few left-led unions. The unions remained, but the left leadership had been purged from most of them.
Mm-hmm. What were your interests in sort of your desires? What did you want to see happen in this country and so forth? What was your draw towards the left-wing work?
Well, I think I was brought up in with the idea that the Soviet Union and socialism and eventually communism was what should be the way of the world. That this would lead to a egalitarian society, that anti-Semitism would be eliminated, there would be peace in the world, there would be no more poverty. This was a very important goal and dream that I assume the majority of members of the Communist Party, or the vast majority, maybe all of them, had in mind, and this is why they were attracted to the communist movement. And in some ways, the communist movement here locally, here in the United States, try to affect that in a small way. For instance, the Communist Party was, to a large degree, responsible for breaking the color line in professional baseball. The union that I belong to, the National Maritime Union, the seamen before that were extremely, ships were very much segregated. And so one of the things that the National Maritime Union said that they accomplished was that there were checkerboard crews. There were no longer white crews in one ship and black crews in another. I don't even know how many black seamen there actually were before the National Maritime Union. But that was something that they were proud of, that the blacks and whites served together on the same ships. So, and generally speaking, in the trade union movement, left-led trade union movement, there was this attempt to eliminate racism and the effects of racism, and the communists, to a large degree, or to an important degree, helped to build the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, which were much more inclusive trade unions than the AFL was, and there was a tremendous movement that galvanized the trade union movement and made it an important force in this country politically and as well as otherwise. So I think that's the attraction for the communist movement. My attraction to the Soviet Union were based upon these concepts.
So really high ideals, and you believed in these ideals and thought this was the way.
I don't look at them, quote unquote, and I never, I didn't think of them. Hey, I'm a real high idealist. But thinking back on it, yes, they, I'm not looking at it as an individual. I think these were important ideals that thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans had, and not only in Americans, of course, but many, many people in European countries. Italy became after the war, became very, very close to having a communist government. And it wasn't, except for the intervention of the Truman administration, that probably would have happened. Germany, before the war, had a very, very strong communist movement. And and there were hundreds of thousands of people who were drawn to the Communist Party and the Communist movement. Many, many important people, by the way, including people of significance such as Albert Einstein and Helen Keller. It's not very well. It wasn't known popularly that these people such as they were in favor of a communist society or a socialist society, but they were, and for a while the Communist Party played during the war in particular, played an important political role in this country. I mean, I'd never know what actually happened, but I understand that Earl Browder, who was the head of the Communist Party for a while, actually met with FDR during wartime. So that was, and I remember some of the May Day parades, particularly right after the war. Thousands and thousands of people marching down Fifth Avenue, and many of them in uniform, men and women who had just recently been discharged from the Army, and some Communist Party members. Many of them played a very heroic role in the Second World War, and some of them were veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. And some personal friends of ours fought in Spain and then went into the United States Armed Forces after that.
Mm-hmm. So how did you first get involved literally in the party? Give me some of your background. I know at Cornell you were part of the student.
Well, I think I first became officially involved at Boston in Northeastern, when I was in Northeastern. And I think it was at that time that I actually joined the Communist Party, because students, as well as adults, were admitted to membership in the party. Before that, there was what was called a YCL, Young Communist League, and as far as I remember, I was never a member of the YCL, because there wasn't really a movement in Ithaca when I was in high school, that I recall. So for the year that I was in Northeastern, I was involved in that organizationally, and then when I came back to Ithaca and went to school at Ithaca College, I was not involved. So it wasn't until I went to, got into the Merchant Marine, and there was a Communist Party organization that on the waterfront, which I belonged to, because there was Communist Party leadership within the National Maritime Union, and the Communist Party played an important role in organizing the National Maritime Union, and several of the national leaders of the union were members of the CP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, you were also the head of the student Communist Party at Cornell?
When I went back to Cornell, for 1 year, I was the what they called the branch organizer.
of the Communist Party. And what did
at the Communist Party at Cornell, yeah.
And what did that involve? I mean, what was it? Kind of organizing rallies, or what did you do?
Yeah, getting occasional speaker to come up, and there were also what they called front organizations that that existed at Cornell, as well as in nationally, and where the front organizations were able to do things in some cases that the Communist Party was not able to. Because by the time I was at Cornell, the Communist Party was kind of an underground organization. Not kind of, it was. Certainly by my second year at Cornell anyway, and we met clandestinely. But there was I think it was called I forget the name of the left-led student organization, American Youth for Democracy or something like that. And so we, helped organize meetings and rallies and things like that and I know at one point there was a attempt to have more integration on campus, and that was part of the.
So this is 1946, 47,
48.
and already the Cold War is in full swing. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
the Communist Party is kind of going underground a little bit.
Well, it was underground. I mean, people were. It was definitely underground because people were being arrested and put in jail because they were members of the Communist Party, and then a number of Communist Party members went underground in the sense that they went into industry, and in many cases were dispersed throughout the country, working in factories and so forth, and an attempt to organize the various shops and factories throughout the country. That was an interesting period, and people's lives were, in many cases, disrupted. And what practical effect it had, I often questioned in the long run. But I never got involved in that. But I had friends that did. So they were underground. They were not. They didn't announce themselves as members of the Communist Party. So that was what was happening.
Yeah.
Part of what was happening in those days.
So it's during this time. How did you first come to know Julius Rosenberg? And it was during this time. And how was that?
I met Julius socially a couple of times, I think, before I went to Cornell. I worked, after I stopped sailing, I worked for the American Labor Party in New York City. And so I spent about a year and a half in New York before I went back to school. And I met Julius through the future husband of a high school friend of mine from Ithaca, and whether it was once or twice, I'm not sure. I met Julius and Joel Barr, and the person I'm referring to, the future husband of this friend of mine was Al Sarant.
So you knew, you went to high school with the future wife of Al Sarant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I see.
And we remained friends for, many years.
Okay. And then just take me through the chronology of this developing relationship. Then you moved back to Ithaca, and the Sarants were there, and you were socializing?
Yeah, they had moved to Ithaca after they were married. Her parents living there, and he was trying to get a job at Cornell, he was a scientist, an engineer, I guess, and I don't think he ever did get a job at Cornell. But I remember one time he was a painting contractor. I know I worked for him one summer, and so he was making a living in one way or another. And of course, looking back on it, he was making friends with some people that may have been helpful in what he was attempting to do. There were some very important people at Cornell. Like, now whether they were actually aware of his association or activities outside of what he was doing on the surface, I have no idea.
This is Al Sarant.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what kind of relationship did you have with the Sarants? How often would you see them? You know, you work for him, you say?
Yeah, well, you know, we were sociable and didn't spend too much time together because I was, you know, an undergraduate, busy at Cornell, busy in my schoolwork, but more busy in my work with the student newspaper. But you know, we were friends.
So you would see them, and then how
and we worked together on the in the Wallace campaign, 1948.
Mm-hmm. And where does Joel Barr enter into the?
Well, I had met Joel again just socially in the city. And I remember we went camping one weekend. I think we went to a party or two, as I recall. And then he disappeared. I remember calling his house a couple of times and not getting any information as to when he would be back or where he was. I mean, whoever answered the phone was being very, looking back on it, was being very uninformative. Presumably whoever answered the phone, whether it was his mother or not. He wasn't married. I assume he was living still at home. So she must have had some idea of where he was or what he was, or where he'd gone to. Yeah.
She didn't know if you were the FBI or what.
Right.
Yeah. Now, these relationship with Joel Barr and that time in this camping trip and so on and so forth, what was going on there? I mean, what were you two talking about? Were you talking about party ideas and, you know, changing the country, or was he talking?
I don't remember what specifically what we're talking about, but it was quite possible that he was feeling me out.
For what purpose?
Hmm?
For what purpose?
Maybe as a possible recruit. I don't know whether that was the case, but that's a possibility. As I look back upon it, that could very well have been part of his reason of being friendly with me.
Mm-hmm. And what was Joel's relationship with the Sarants?
They were friends, and I think they had worked together. I'm not sure. I really don't know. I mean, that's how I met Joel, through Al. And they eventually ended up in the Soviet Union, and they were very good friends. I mean that has came out later, and I remember that there was some mention of the fact that Al died in the Soviet Union, and Joel was. I think there was a photograph of him visiting Al's gravesite and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so at the time back then in Ithaca, they were friends.
They were not in Ithaca. Joel wasn't in Ithaca.
Al was.
Huh?
Al was.
Al was in Ithaca.
Right.
Yeah.
But you were introduced to Joel through Al, basically.
Yeah, when I was in New York.
Oh, when you were in New York.
Before I went back to school.
And did you ever see Joel up in Ithaca then?
No.
Oh, I see. So the camping trip and stuff happened before you had gone.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I see. So that would have been what, 45 then, or?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I see. Before you moved back to Ithaca.
Mm-hmm.
And then tell me more about with Julius. You know, you met him a couple of times and so forth. How did that relationship develop?
Nothing. It was a very I just met him. I didn't know who he was. And, you know, just like just like meeting. It was just a very casual. I don't even, as far as I know, I didn't even know his name at the time.
Uh-huh. And did you ever see him again?
He was just another guy.
Uh-huh.
I was living out in the country with my mother and her husband at the time, and Al drove up one afternoon with someone whom he introduced to me as Julius, and we went for, I don't know if we went for a ride or whatever, it doesn't matter, but they gave me some idea of what they were doing, which I hadn't had no inkling of whatsoever, and asked me whether I would be interested in joining their efforts. And I said, of course. You know, I was very appreciative of the role of the Soviet Union, as I mentioned before. And at that time, I thought this should eventually be the way of the world. And they had been our ally, and I didn't see there was anything, I had no compunctions or any thought that this was anything wrong about this. And what they pointed out to me, however, was that, you know, there was some danger involved in this. No physical danger. They specifically mentioned that, but, you know, that I could very well, might be arrested, might have to spend some time in jail. And I said, yeah, you know, I'd be willing to face that consequence. So, you know, I didn't know what I was going to be doing once I got into, when I went back down to the city. And so this potentially gave me some kind of a focus. Because I had the feeling that I wasn't going to be getting into trade union work, because I had a reputation of being left wing, I'm sure, and probably on the FBI list, and so there were very few at that time, relatively few opportunities for me. Anyway, so that's what happened. That was my contact with Julius, and then when I got into then I was given a key to an apartment on the West Village where I could stay when I went into the city. And this is, I understand, although I wasn't told that specifically, I don't believe, I understand this was, I think this is where Al and his wife lived for a while. And I think this was also where they had some equipment where they photographed documents, but I'm not sure. And I remember one time I was there and somebody knocked at the door. I was there with a girlfriend, and there wasn't hardly anything in the apartment except a bed. And there's a knock on the door, and it's the landlord. And he had to come in. He had to check in some, this was on the top floor, had some problem with the roof. He told me. He walked in with another guy, and you know, they're presumably looking at the ceiling, and obviously, whoever the other guy was, could be FBI. You know, was checking me out. So at one time, as I recall, I was told, you know, they had to give up the apartment, and so I moved out of there.
Well, take me back a little bit, you know, to this time that Julius and Al came to your mother's house, and you were living there, and you went for a ride or for a walk or sat in the living, whatever you did. What do you recall? What did they pitch to you? I mean, what were they saying that they were involved in, and how did they put it to you that you agreed to
I don't remember the specific day, but as I recall, all I can kind of assume is what they said. They were involved in gathering some information that would be helpful to the Soviet Union, and would I be interested in participating? And my role, I assume, would be that of a courier. I was not an engineer. I had no access to any information, and so all I could possibly do would be to transmit information. So that was a story.
So, was it your understanding at the time, or in hindsight, did they state to you that this would be sort of industrial espionage, or technology secrets, or how?
They may have, but I don't remember.
But it was
I really don't.
dangerous, and it was illegal, and but it's to help the cause.
Yeah, and correct. I think that's a good way of putting it.
Okay, and you were willing to step up and do that because you believed in this.
I believed in the cause.
Yeah.
I believed in believed in doing anything to help the cause of socialism. I shouldn't say anything, but I believed in wanting. Anyway, so I resigned. I left the Communist Party at that time. I don't know whether it was necessary for me to do that, but I thought it might be better in case there was some, if I were arrested or whatever. But of course, in retrospect, that was a silly thing to do because it really didn't make any difference whether I was a card-carrying member or whether I'd been a card-carrying member. And I didn't make any announcement that, hey, I'm no longer believe in communism, and I don't want to have anything to do with the Communist Party or whatever. So it was just something that I thought might be helpful.
Right. Now, were they able to pay you for this? I mean, was there
No, there was no involvement being paid. Eventually, Julius did give me some money from time to time, but this was not considered. It wasn't presented to me this was going to be a job. Yeah.
Okay, it was more for the thing. So they gave you the key to this apartment, which you used from time to time.
Not from time to time. That's where
You lived there.
Yeah, that was my place to live, and for a short while, a friend of mine from Cornell came to the city and looked me up, and he had a family out on the island someplace, but he had a temporary job in Manhattan, so he stayed with me. Now, he was not in any way involved in any of my political activity at Cornell. He was just a friend, and not even a good friend. And ultimately I found out that then he went to Las Vegas to get a divorce. I guess he was still married when he came in, but he must have been separated at that time. And the FBI went out to Vegas and flew him back to the city. And I think he told me subsequently, he took him up to the apartment, wanted to know, is this where he stayed, and did he notice any, I don't know what questions precisely they asked him, but he didn't know anything. He was there wasn't any evidence of any activity that might have taken place in this apartment. So
now, what happened at that point? You get the key to the apartment, you go stay in the apartment. How did it sort of work with you? Was it like, wait for a phone call for more information, or somebody will whisper something to you? I mean, what is it that you did, and what went on during that period of time? Did Julius?
I mean, Julius and I met him a few times. As far as I know, as I recall, I think I called him or I don't know how we made contact exactly. I know one time after his brother-in-law was arrested, I walked down to the neighborhood where his shop was, and hoping to see him, and it so happened that he, shortly after I arrived in that neighborhood, which is Lower East Side, I saw him walking down the street. And that was the only time I remember that we met clandestinely like that. Otherwise, I remember, it was a funny thing, I don't remember how we met, but it wasn't very often, you know. And in actuality, you know, I should point out that my involvement with this is in no way, I mean, this whole business is in no way of any importance. I was a Johnny-come-lately. I really didn't do anything. And if anyone had asked me, if anyone would say to me, did I commit espionage? Absolutely not. Do I know of anyone who committed espionage? Absolutely not. I mean, all I know is that I think I know that people that I know committed espionage. But did I see anyone do anything? Did I actually participate in any way with anyone in any kind of activity? No, you know. So I mean, I could honestly say that I only know by hearsay that there was espionage activity. And this is what I told Robbie Mirapole, although he says it wasn't he, it was his brother that I told that to. I said, this was many years ago, I said there was something, in my opinion, there was something going on at that time. And I didn't go into any details as to my knowledge or experience. And that's what I would have to say, that, you know, if I were under oath and somebody said to me, you know, I would say, hey, you know, I think there may have been, but I really don't know. So, I did not play a role of any significance or importance in this. All I have, it just so happens that I was acquainted with some of the people who were presumably involved in espionage. Mm-hmm. So what they did, what they accomplished, was it of any significance? Was it of any value? Did it in any way compromise the position of the United States? I would have to say, I don't know. Yeah, but I don't believe so. I don't believe it had endangered the security of the United States. And I strongly believe that the execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg was absolutely judicial murder, and something that is and should be condemned. I think it was a terrible period, part of a terrible period that existed here in the United States, and affected the lives negatively of many people. And I know that I was followed by the FBI when I was in New York City looking for a job. I would be told by people who were sympathetic people who, this happened 2 or 3 times anyway, who would call me and say, I think you should know that the FBI was here after you came up for an interview or whatever it was. And of course they interviewed many of my friends and acquaintances at college and wherever. A couple of my girlfriends, you know, got they scared the shit out of them. And it, ironically, I met this one woman, and she took me up to her apartment, and I didn't believe it. It was on the 5th floor of 50 Morton Street, right next to where the apartment where I had stayed in for a while. And I said, gee, this is deja vu all over again. Anyway, that didn't last very long, because I think they, I was told by a mutual friend that the FBI came, and she didn't want to have anything more to do with me. Matter of fact, I was told she was very angry that I had come up there or something, I don't know.
Back to the espionage question, and you honestly saying that you couldn't say for sure. Is that because, certainly that was the intention. That's what you were all doing.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you didn't know literally, is that because of the way possibly that it was organized, that one piece didn't know what the other was doing, and you were doing such a small little piece of transferring of information or whatever that you have no clue what...
I didn't transfer any information.
Okay.
And I know that there were various, I don't know, but we were told subsequently that there were other people involved in Soviet espionage. Which is not surprising. We were spying on the Soviet Union was spying on us, and France was spying on us, and we were spying on France. And, the same way that Israel has spies in the United States, and we have spies in Israel, I'm sure. So, this goes on all the time. So I would have no hesitation in saying this is probably going on. But I did not personally participate in any... And I'm not saying this to protect myself. This is just because I'm no longer in any danger, obviously. But I assume I'm no longer in any danger. But this is just, this is what I did or didn't do.
Right. There were a couple, anecdotes that you told me. They didn't add up too much, but there were things that you did. There were interactions. You were supposed to meet somebody at the museum.
Yeah.
Tell me those kind of things.
Well, no, that was one time Julius asked me to go to the Museum of Metropolitan Museum of Art and wait under a certain picture, and somebody would come to talk to me, which I did, but nothing ever happened. And that was it.
Uh-huh. So how long did you stay in the apartment?
I don't know, not too long, a few months.
Oh, just a few months?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. And then what happened to change that arrangement? Why did you move on, or what?
Well, because Julius said that, they had to give the apartment up. It was, there was, I don't know why they had to get it up, just because, maybe because of the cost, or just because there was no real use for it anymore.
I see. So that was a very temporary.
Yeah.
And where did you go then?
Then I moved in with Jim Weinstein, a Cornell friend of mine.
I see.
I was on the West Village, and I moved over to the East Village.
I see. And so there was only periodic and very sporadic connection with Julius after that. You were sort of had agreed to be whatever role he had in mind, but not much happened. And how quickly after that did things really start to unravel?
Very, very soon, because shortly after his brother-in-law was arrested, then he was arrested. And at one time he asked me whether I knew of any way of hiring a boat. And I don't know, I never pursued it, whether there wasn't time for it what. But you know, what he had in mind was the possibility of leaving the country, and but nothing ever came of that.
I see. Give me the chronology of when you moved to the apartment till Julius's arrest. How much time was that?
Not much time.
He was arrested months later?
Hmm?
He was arrested months later?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you moved to the apartment. 2 months later, they gave the apartment up. And a few months after that, Julius was arrested.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that during the time that apartment, things were closing in on him? Or do you think that, did you have any inkling of what was going on? I mean, he asked you about the boat.
Well, this was after his brother-in-law was arrested.
I see.
Greenglass. David
see.
Greenglass. Yeah.
I see.
So there was, it was a relatively, as I recall, a relatively short interval, and that was the end. That was the end of end of my involvement, of course, and the end of my relationship with him. I went to some rallies in their defense, and some attempts to raise money and so forth. I mean, fundraising events, and that went on. That was it.
Yeah. Now it was mentioned somewhere, Radosh's book or somewhere that Julius allegedly said in prison that Max Finestone was my last recruit. Does this make sense to you?
It's possible. It's possible.
Well,
I mean, I can't. I think it's. It's hard to believe that he would say something like that to anyone. And if he did, it was kind of a dumb thing to. I mean, well, more than a dumb thing to do. But it's quite possible that he said that. It's also quite possible that the FBI was aware of this. So they planted this information on this guy talking to, or I think it was his name, yeah. I think that may very well have been.
For what purpose?
Huh?
For what purpose?
To get me involved. I don't know. I mean, I assume that, what else? What other purpose would they have? Obviously they would have liked me to talk, or any of us who were brought up before the grand jury or the House, committee, McCarthy committee, and so the more, although they never said to me that, Julius said that you were his last recruit. They never said that to me. I didn't hear anything about that until I read the book.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the years later you got that comment. I see. That must have been in a file somewhere, maybe. I don't know. So one can assume that the period that you became peripherally involved in this thing, Julius was under heavy scrutiny. They were close. And so one would assume they knew all about you, that you lived in this apartment. They probably have photos of you going in the apartment, who knows what. What happened to you after this point with Julius's arrest? What was the impact on your life in terms of the FBI and so on and so forth?
Well, they followed me around, and I think one time I realized I was being followed, and I think I gave him the slip, and see, I did a lot of traveling in my work, so that probably made them traveling within the New York City area, primarily because I was doing market research, and so they probably thought I was you know, being an envoy or some kind. And so they followed me around, and I don't know to what degree. You know, they questioned a lot of my friends from Cornell and local people. And I remember one time some friend of mine whom I forget where I met him. I was spending some time with, you know, just socially, and he took me down to visit his mother one time, and the next time we went there, she was furious. How did you dare to come to her, or something of that kind, you know, because evidently they'd come to see her. So they bothered a lot of my friends. As I mentioned, they attempted to interfere with my getting a job. They kept me under surveillance for 20 years, as I found out from FOIA. You know, the end result, fortunately, was I was okay. You know, but there are lots of people who were not even remotely involved with anything of espionage, whose lives, as I mentioned before, are very seriously affected. People who, well, in some cases lost their lives. I mentioned, you know, we saw this part of a movie clip last night with Canada Lee. Well, Canada Lee and John Garfield were two of the movie actors who were blacklisted, and both of them died shortly after that. And you know, whether there was a direct connection or not, you know, they had heart attacks. It could very well have been, you know, the stress and you know, couldn't find work. So it was a very terrible period in American history. And so what, you know, then I went on with my life. I met Annette. Oh yeah, one time I took a trip down to Mexico in 1952 with some guy, and I found out later that he had been told to observe my actions, what I did in Mexico, and who I met with, and so forth. I mean, we're just taking a trip down there, and so, you know, they in various ways they kept tabs on me, but fortunately, things turned out okay.
Yeah. When you and not much happens, and then a few months later, Julius is arrested. What was going through your mind? And then as things developed in the press and so forth, were you like, oh my God, I had no idea, or wow, I'm glad, you know, I didn't get involved, or this is you know, trumped up charges? I mean, what were you thinking when this came crashing down around Julius, and it became quite obviously quite serious and mushroomed into this catastrophic event? But in those first months and that year, when the Julius and Ethel were arrested.
Well, obviously I must have considered the possibility that I would be arrested. Julius had given me the name of an attorney to contact in the event that something happened. I was visited by the FBI. So I contacted this attorney, and as I recall, he sloughed me off. He said, you know, just, you know, go on about your life, kind of thing. And then when I was subpoenaed, I contacted Leonard Boudin, who was a famous civil liberties attorney and was the brother of a very, very good friend of mine, someone whom I shared an apartment with for a while. So that was, I appeared before a grand jury in New York City. I went to Washington once, maybe twice, I really don't recall. And that was pretty much the end of it. I was never, I think I only got a couple of phone calls subsequently, after that, through the years from the FBI. And, so that was, I think one time the FBI contacted her when we were up in Accor and said something about she answered the phone. I said, "This is the FBI. We'd like to talk to you." And of course she said, "Well, I'm not interested in talking to you." So what they would do, they would go to people and say, "This is something that involves the security of the United States. We want to talk to you." And I assume they showed them pictures, photographs, and so forth. And I got an FOIA report, and most of it was blacked out. But some of what people told them was still in there. And most of the names I have no idea. I assume there were informants when I was at Cornell, and who knows where else? Maybe even within the so-called Rosenberg conspiracy. I don't know. May have been.
And after Julius was arrested, the FBI questioned you fairly soon after that point? And what was that like?
I didn't have anything to do with him.
The government never came and,
Oh, they knocked at my door, yeah.
You never interviewed, but
Right.
you never answered their questions.
No.
And they had nothing on you.
Huh?
Then they had nothing on you, basically.
Obviously not, because I was never arrested. However, two people who wrote one of the books on this whole issue told me, they came to see me, they came to interview me, because they were thinking of writing a second book. And based on their research, they said I was very, very close to being indicted. Why I wasn't, I have no idea. I can assume they just didn't have enough potential evidence to warrant going through the motions. I don't know. I really don't know. But I could have been arrested. Could have been gone to jail. But it never happened.
Mm-hmm. And in hindsight now, all these years and all the books that have been written and your own personal experience, the films have been made, what's your sort of take on the whole Rosenberg story? What do you believe to be the truth of the situation?
Well, for years I denied that there was ever such a thing as espionage as far as Julius and my friends were concerned. Because this was the official line, so to speak. Once, I remember some friends of mine who had read something in the newspaper or magazine or whatever, they didn't ask me whether I was involved, but whether I thought maybe there was some industrial espionage going on. I said, "Oh, no, I don't believe so." Because actually probably that's all it was. But, once the Mirapoles accepted the fact that their parents, or their father at least, was involved in some kind of espionage activity, then I felt there was no reason for me to maintain this facade of not knowing any, of denying it. And because in actuality, there was, they weren't doing anything wrong in my mind. And they were, as I mentioned before, this was a judicial murder. And I don't think I did anything wrong. I know I didn't do anything wrong because I didn't do anything I was willing to do, but so I never discussed this with Annette or with anyone else in my family. And I prepared, and once I was asked by The Nation magazine to write an article refuting the information in Ray Osh's book, and I prepared a very convincing denial of everything that he had to say and everything that Weinstein said. And well, for one reason or another, they decided not to use it. So that was the end of my involvement. Once this, I remember going down to the city and meeting with Victor Navasky, and then he assigned someone who had written a book about Alger Hiss. He was, an established author, to work with me on this article. I met with him once, maybe twice, and that was the end of it.
So you had this position of denial to protect the children, and that was the line and so forth. But then,
well, not only protect the children, but protect the. No, I wasn't protecting them specifically. I was just the
integrity
of the Communist Party movement. Right. I mean, what the government was trying to establish was that in my opinion, was that the government was. I mean, the Communist Party was an agent for Soviet espionage. And what I was told yesterday was that if Julius and Ethel had confessed, what they would have been asked to do was to go around the country, well, first place name names of people who were involved with them, and then to go around the country and lecturing and saying, that the Soviet Union was an evil empire, anti-Semitism existed there, and all Jewish people should get out of the Communist Party and have nothing to do with the Soviet Union and so forth. And they were obviously unwilling to do that. This would have saved their lives. But did they do the right thing? Robbie thinks that they did, from what he told me. He said he would much rather be the son of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg than of David Greenglass. So that, it's an interesting observation. And I was thinking, I've often thought, did they do the right thing? Should they have saved their lives? But what would I have done in their position? I don't know. I don't know. I sometimes I think that I would not have had their strength of conviction, of character, and so forth. Did they do the right thing to begin with? I shouldn't say they, I should say he. To get involved in this, to be from the very beginning, a father of 2 young children, knowing that there was some danger involved. I don't think they ever had anticipated the possibility of being executed, but certainly they had to anticipate they didn't, I mean, from what Julius told me, they did anticipate the possibility of going to jail. Not him, not her probably, but him. So was this the right thing to do for someone? But as Robbie pointed out, hey, you know, there were lots and lots of people who enlisted in the army in the Second World War, who had children, who felt this was the right thing to do, that they wanted to fight fascism, and that this took priority, and you know, many of them died. Didn't have to go. So this is, you know, you can look at this in the same way that Julius says, hey, this is my way of fighting fascism. And regardless of the possible consequences, he may have thought that the dire consequences were potentially much less of somebody who went into the army and knew that there was a possibility of their going overseas and fighting in the war. But then again, I don't think most people who get involved in combat believe that they're the ones that are going to get killed. I don't think there would be, there probably wouldn't be any wars if the majority of soldiers thought that there was a good possibility that they're getting killed. I never, you know, when I was in the Merchant Marine, I never thought that that my ship was going to be sunk. And I remember saying, well, you know, if it was sunk, you know, I haven't had a life jacket, I'd jump into the water. And, you know, completely unrealistic attitude to take. But, you know, it was always going to be, matter of fact, my first ship we were down the Caribbean, and I know we were given a report that a couple of days before we had set sail that some ship had been sunk down there. I don't know whether it's true or not, because by the time I got in, the U-boat situation was fairly well under control. But I didn't think that my ship, my tanker, you know, was going to get hit just because this other one was. So anyway, I mean, that's a diversion and nothing to do with what we're talking about. So any other questions?
Well, just, you know, briefly again, what do you think is the reality of what was going on with Julius and what was happening?
My assumption is that there was industrial espionage. I don't think they had any knowledge of any of the people involved, had any knowledge of what was going on in with the atomic bomb. I don't think so. Green glass, however, did work at Los Alamos. I guess it was Los Alamos. So I guess Julius involved him because of this, and in the hopes of perhaps getting some information. I don't know whether he was asked to do that or not. And you know, Green Glass came up with evidently some phony sketch that you know, that nothing to do. I mean, the real important espionage, as far as the atomic bomb was concerned, was Klaus Fuchs, who was an Englishman. He was arrested and tried and spent 15 years in jail. I mean, he knew what was going on with it. If the Soviets got any help in their development of the atomic bomb, it was Klaus Fuchs who played a very significant and important role. So, I mean, Julius Rosenberg and whomever else was working with him, if anything, played a very insignificant role in this. I mean, this was just a phony besiness. I mean, this Kaufman charging them with being responsible for the Korean War and the death of thousands of American soldiers.
Did you ever meet Ethel, and did you have any
Never
indication
met
that she was
her.
involved in
Never
the war?
met her. Never met her. Just a couple of times when I called, she answered the phone. That was it.
And there was no indication that she was at all in any way involved.
I think she probably knew what was going on. It was very difficult for her not to know what was going on. What her involvement was, I have no idea. I don't think she was involved, but then again, I don't know.
And last little story, if you could just tell me about being called up in front of Joe McCarthy's committee, what that was like for you, what went on, whatever you want to say about that story.
Well, as I recall, I thought of, what was running through my mind, what am I going to say to this guy, I'm going to be a hero, I'm going to go tell them to go screw themselves. And I, composed various statements in my mind. I don't think I ever wrote anything down. Why I didn't do it, I don't know. Whether my lawyer said, cool it, it's not going to do you any good, or whether I just chickened out, I don't know. Could very well be a combination of the two things, or may have just been the latter. But I was not a hero, and I didn't do what people like Pete Seeger did, and other people who stood up to these guys. So I listened to their questions, and as you read, I didn't answer any of them. And what I do regret is I look back upon his last statement, something about my facing the fate of the Rosenbergs. I just wish I had said something at that time. I just wish I had said, "You are a sick son of a bitch." This is the way I felt about it then, and I even feel more strongly about it now, and because there was, well, I don't know why.
What did he say?
He said that did I want to face something about you? Well, you read it. I forget what his exact words. That it was pretty chilling. That I could face electrocution the way the Rosenbergs had. But of course, that was just bombast. There was no. I assume it was just bombast. There was no. I mean, this is the beginning of the end of McCarthy, and so that's it.